So the focus of this talk will be the forever chemicals group, which of PFAS in food packaging, and we'll have we'll talk about what PFAS are, where they're used, the problem with PFAS, the solutions, what's happening now, sort of for us in the UK, and then we can have some questions and we can talk a little bit about what's happening in other places as well. So these are PFAS. PFAS stands for per or polyfluorinated alkyl substances, which is a horrible thing to remember. And I'm not really a chemist, so to me the thing are big long chains of carbon atoms. Oh, sorry, I'll go back there a minute. So yeah, my computer is being too speedy. They're big long chains of carbon atoms with fluorine atoms thrown in. And the thing that's really distinctive about these, if there's any chemists, is that the bond between the fluorine and carbon is really, really strong, and it's really hard to break. So you get long chain and short chain PFAS. The short chain ones can make the long chain ones. The long chain ones can break down to the short chain ones. So they can basically keep doing that. They're man-made, they don't occur in nature. The group of PFAS has got some slightly different definitions depending on who is talking about them, but generally speaking, there's between 5,000 and 10,000 different chemicals in this group. So we're talking about a lot of different chemicals. We don't actually know exactly how many are being used. And we don't always know what products they're in, because this is the trouble with a lot of regulations around the world, is you don't always have to say what is in your product. So PFAS are also called PFCs, especially if they're on sort of waterproof clothing. Greenpeace had a big campaign about PFCs a few years ago, which means a lot of big companies that produce waterproof clothing have removed them. So you might see labels that say PFC free. And they're also called fluorocarbons, forever chemicals, they last forever. Teflon, which you may have heard of, which is used especially in cooking utensils and products. And PTFE, which is used for a lubricant in a lot of things like bicycles and also in mechanical equipment in factories. So this is where they've come from. So they were first made in the 1930s by somebody working on CFCs, which we use as refrigerants, sort of cooling gas in fridges. Then, as part of a big project called the Manhattan Project, a chemical company called DuPont designed and built a chemical separation plant. And then in the 1940s, they made PTFE into a commercial product called Teflon. And that then started being used in our sort of things that we use in the home, like baking tins and saucepans, and became very popular. And then from the 1960s until today, it's just being used more and more and more for a lot of things, which we will talk about some of them a bit more. So they're not all the same, but they all have that carbon-fluorine bond, which makes them really strong. They repel oil and water, so they stop oil and water going through them. So you get them on a lot of clothing and equipment. They stop things staining, and then they're used in food packaging to stop grease or water going through. So there's some waterproof clothing. They are non-stick, as we said. So they're also on things like bike oils, and if you're in the right sort of country, cookware, ski and snowboard wax. And then they're used quite a lot in surfactants, which help things mix and spread. So paints and adhesives and sealants. Cosmetics, if you're using lipsticks or mascara or something like that, they may have PFAS in. Shampoos as well. And then cleaning products, just even in your home. So the problems with PFAS is there are so many of them. So definitely over 5,000 of them. They are really, 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 really persistent. They last a long time. They don't break down. A lot of them we know are poisonous. They're toxic to wildlife and humans. A lot of them we don't know anything about them, but they're being used. They're really mobile in the environment. They've been found in parts of the world, such as the Arctic, where they shouldn't be. And they bioaccumulate, so they build up in animals and in plants and in people. And that's the real problem, because you might be exposed to a little bit, but over a long time that's going to build up until it's really big levels. So the other problem with PFAS is we don't know a lot about it. A lot of the research that's being done into it, it's not that it doesn't agree with each other, it's just being done in different ways and on different things. It's been really hard to prove that you can see a correlation between the use of PFAS and a bad effect, but it's really hard to prove that it's the PFAS making that happen. It is happening more. There is more proof coming out. So the more it's being looked at, the more PFAS are being found to be bad. There's a chemical cocktail effect, which means that PFAS can interact with each other and other chemicals in the environment to have a stronger effect than if it's just there on its own. There are some really big gaps in the research. As we said already, some PFAS we really don't know anything about, but they're still being used. And there is a real lack of knowledge about what is a safe exposure level or tolerable daily intake. So, for example, what is safe on your food or in your water. And it's used in so many things that it is getting into our plants and our animals. For example, it's used in pesticides, not all pesticides, but some pesticides. And that's obviously being put straight onto plants, and also they may be getting eaten by animals, and then it's getting straight into the animals as well. And then because we haven't been looking at them for very long, and they are building up, it's hard to predict what the sort of long-term effects are going to be. What we've seen so far are not good. So what we're trying to do is move towards being careful and being precautionary and reducing the use of PFAS. So there was a really big study done in the US as part of a lawsuit against the chemical company DuPont that was using it. And this linked PFOA, which is one of the PFAS chemicals. So it linked PFOA exposure to all that big long list of medical conditions in people. So high cholesterol, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, testicular cancer, kidney cancer, pregnancy-induced hypertension. And it's also been associated with low birth weights in some studies as well. And it passes from a mother who's breastfeeding their baby. It can pass from the mother to the baby through the breast milk. So the European Union official classifications for PFOA, which is, like I said, one class of PFAS, and then PFOS is another one. They've both been banned around the world by the Stockholm Convention. So the European Union's official classifications for them are that they are carcinogenic, reprotoxic, so poisonous to reproductive processes, lact, so I think that is they pass through breast milk, and toxic to specific organs such as the liver. So EFSA, which is the European scientific body, published their scientific opinion in 2020, and they widened it, so it didn't just cover PFOA and PFOS, two of the types of PFAS, but it also covered ones which are called PFNA, PFDA, and PFHXS. And actually, PFHXS has just been added to the Stockholm Convention, so countries that are signed up to the Stockholm Convention will be banning that from being used in their countries. So their scientific opinion was that these PFAS reduce antibody responses to vaccinations. They increase the likelihood for infection. They increase levels of cholesterol, as we saw before, and then, as I said, they're associated with low birth weight. A lot of studies have been done on animals rather than people, and they found changes to the liver, thyroid, and testosterone levels, increased fetal and neonatal mortality, so associated with pregnancy. Developmental neurotoxic effects, so learning development, and an increase in tumor development as well. And then there's emerging evidence that links PFAS exposure to brain and reproductive system and hormonal system problems in polar bears, immune system, kidney, liver functions of bottlenose dolphins, and immune systems of otters. In Scotland, we have a resident killer whale colony that is facing extinction due to the sort of chemicals it's having to deal with in the seas. So we're finding really high levels of chemicals like DDT that have been banned for a long time. Now that we're looking for PFAS, we're finding high levels of PFAS in them as well. And the more we look for them, the more we seem to find them. So that's all really bad news that I just gave you, sorry. So what are the steps that can be taken? The first thing we ask for as Fidra is for companies to take some voluntary action. So for example, we looked at the PFAS use in school uniforms for our first work on this. They used to coat school uniforms to stop them staining, and we found that this wasn't a necessary use, and it was easy to ask the retailers to look for uniforms that didn't have that same resistance on to remove it. So we put together arguments that were against what the retailers were saying about the fact that they thought their customers wanted it. They thought they would be good because they would be easier to keep clean, so you'd have to wash them less. And we found that we did a survey of people that use school uniforms, and we found that that wasn't really happening. And we produced a report, which is on our website if anybody wants to access it and read it. And so then we used evidence from the community to make the case against the continued use of these chemicals in school uniforms. And we engaged with the shops that were selling these in a very sort of friendly way and a collaborative way, and we drew up a table to get them to be able to show if they didn't have PFAS in their school uniforms and if they were phasing them out. So we found that they really like to show that they were doing a good thing. So rather than pointing at them and saying you're doing a bad thing, we said, well, if you do a good thing, we'll say that you're doing a good thing. So you know, we're trying to persuade them to make a good step, and then we'll promote it. So after that, we then looked at PFAS in food packaging. So, you know, we recognize that as being a really important use, especially as it's used in paper and cardboard packaging, which everyone sees as a good alternative to plastics. But unfortunately, we have all the problems you've already seen, and then also PFAS can move into food from packaging. And then food packaging, like paper and cardboard, is used so much, it's a high turnover item, so it's used and thrown away and used and thrown away a lot. So there's a lot of PFAS being used on it. So we wanted to find out how widespread the problem was, because when we were looking at this, not a lot of people had looked at food packaging. So we worked with some researchers to come up with the bead test, which is a test for PFAS that you can just do in your home. And the way that it works is you take some food packaging and you put a drop of oil, cooking oil, on it. So olive oil is the thing that works the best, but if you have other oils, they should work fine too. And on the packaging, the oil will do one of three things. So it will either soak in, which is like the first picture on the screen, or it will spread out, which is like the second picture, or it will form a really round bead, which is what we call that shape. And there's a video on our website as well, which shows you how to do this. We call it the bead test. And if it forms a really round bead, that suggests, doesn't say a definite yes or no, but it suggests that there is PFAS in the food packaging that's making it make that shape. So we did that, this simple test ourselves on a whole range of food packaging from lots of different places. So we did sandwich boxes, pizza boxes, coffee cups, takeaway boxes, paper bags that food were in. And these are all the ones we tested, and it shows you that we found or a suggestion of PFAS in a few things. So it was actually 30% of the products we tested. We then took those classes of products and we sent them for further testing. And we got products from a lot of different places, and we found PFAS in greaseproof paper, popcorn wrappers, bakery bags, pizza boxes, takeaway bags, and these compostable clamshell containers. And these were the results when we sent them off to a lab. We found PFAS in 90% of the products that we sent to the lab. And you can see that the biggest levels were in the takeaway boxes. So we had got this packaging from a few different shops, and we found PFAS in 8 out of 9 supermarkets packaging that we tested. And we found them in all the takeaway samples that we tested. Now, Denmark has actually banned or set really low levels of PFAS that can be used in food contact materials. And some of the levels we found were 300 times the level that is allowed in Denmark. So the food packaging we're using in this country, you wouldn't be allowed to use in Denmark. So that was quite a bad outcome for us. So then what can you do? You know, I said we would talk about some of the solutions. So, you know, we talked to the shops and the companies about voluntary action, so phasing things out voluntarily. And then once that is started, we find that can help show the governments that they can take action, that the businesses support that. So then we can look for legislative action, and then hopefully this will eventually lead to the chemicals not being used at all. And then to sort of get the voluntary phase out, we talked to the supermarkets, and we looked at who influences the supermarkets, who helps them to decide how to behave. And we found that customers can have a big influence. If customers want something, the supermarkets will try to do it. Investors, so we found that some investors in the sort of big companies were interested in asking those big companies to stop using PFAS. And then talking directly to the sort of industry bodies, so companies that produce food packaging, we found that helped and worked a little bit as well. And then the other thing to do is to sort of increase public knowledge, and that is increasing all the time. So there's a great movie called Dark Waters that was made a few years ago, which is a true story about DuPont in America, and the fact that their workers were having health conditions from using PFAS, and also it was going into the local water bodies and was affecting local populations. And then there was a big court case against them. And this is the story about the lawyer who uncovered it all and sort of helped make the law cases happen. There are more sort of programs and recordings about it. This is one from the UK called Costing the Earth. And then there are sort of more and more articles in newspapers as well. This is one that we had recently, which was about drinking water levels in England. Then we also we produced a video about PFAS, which you're welcome to look at on the website and share. And we had a campaign to collect petitions to ask supermarkets to remove PFAS from their food packaging. And we had that online, and we got a lot of sign-ups to that petition. And then when we were talking to the retailers, we were saying people want to see this change. And then we also had a citizen science campaign where we asked people to test the packaging in their homes, and then send us the results. And so we made this video to show people how to do that, and how to take part. We don't do that anymore. We still have the video on the website, and what we've done is we have an email template on there that you can use to send to a company to ask them if they have PFAS in their products. And then also we have been working towards trying to get the laws changed in the UK. The European Union committed in its chemical strategy for sustainability to ban all non-essential uses of PFAS. So in the UK, we're looking to convince policymakers to take action on the whole group of chemicals, not just the ones that are banned under the Stockholm Convention, which is only 3, compared to 5,000. And then there's also a need to define what an essential use is. So we sometimes use the term avoidable instead. So if you don't need it, you know, if you have it in a food packaging product, but the food isn't greasy or wet, then you don't need PFAS. So, for example, mountaineers who are climbing mountains will need waterproof clothing. Medics and doctors will need scrubs of clothing that doesn't let body fluids soak through. And then people like you and me might really, really want to have items that don't stain, but we don't need it. It's not an essential part of our day-to-day lives. And then sometimes we maybe need to replace PFAS with something that doesn't work as well. So, for example, wind turbines run more efficiently with PTFE as a lubricant, but maybe there are lubricants that don't have PFAS in, which don't work as well. But do we need that really efficient use? And also we need to balance out that with the environmental impact it's having. The way we've approached this in the UK is we have written a letter to sort of senior government ministers who are responsible for the environment and for chemicals, giving them all this information basically that we've shared with you today, and saying that something really needs to be done. We produced a briefing, again, giving similar information. The briefings are on our website, so you're very welcome to download them and use similar wording for your own use. And then what happened as an outcome of that, the UK government did an analysis of management options to deal with PFAS. And that was just published in April this year. And then there's sort of work coming out of that on how to implement and develop policy around PFAS. So part of the pressure that made this happen was getting MPs, our ministers from the government, to be contacted by people. We had people emailing their ministers to let them know about PFAS, and it was something that had to be dealt with. That was part of an online campaign that we had, and then we kept in touch with the people that had done that. They sent 900 emails to more than 70% of our UK ministers, and then it was being discussed in Parliament, in our government, so that has just been really good to sort of raise the profile. And so where are we now? So the supermarkets are really engaged, and we're talking to them quite often about solutions. They haven't found all the solutions yet, but we're having those conversations. There are quite a few food chains and producers who are setting deadlines to go PFAS free. The producers of PFAS are starting to look at alternatives, and producers of products that usually use PFAS. As I said, the policymakers in the UK are working on the chemical strategy and are looking at PFAS legislation as well. And the public are talking about it and asking questions about it. And that's a really important part of this, especially around chemicals, because it's something that you can't see. So it's really hard for people to think about it a lot of the time. And I think that is all the information I was going to share with you today. This is my email for anybody that wants more information, or there's also we've got a website with lots of resources on it, including fact sheets and some great diagrams that explain a lot more of this. But I think I will stop talking now, and we'll see if there are any more, if there are any questions anybody would like to ask.